Maybe she should just start bikini dancing again. Mason's voice boomed across the crowded restaurant, his glass raised high as laughter erupted around our table. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks as every head in the place turned toward us. My brother's company celebration had been going smoothly until he decided to make me the entertainment. My name is Sabrina Ellis. I'm 35 years old, and I've been unemployed for 3 months. What Mason didn't know was that I had just landed the biggest opportunity of my career. But I wasn't ready to share that news yet. Not when he was clearly enjoying himself so much at my expense. "Come on, Sabrina," our father chimed in, his face flushed from the wine. "You've got the experience, right? Those college years weren't completely wasted." The table exploded with fresh laughter, and I watched as Mason high-fived our dad like they were fraternity brothers instead of grown men at a professional gathering. I sat there in the corner of the restaurant in Dallas, nursing my water, while my family entertained a room full of Mason's colleagues from Gravora Group, one of the city's most prestigious marketing firms. The celebration was supposed to honor Mason's recent promotion to senior marketing director, but somehow it had turned into a roast session with me as the main course. "Seriously, though," Mason continued, clearly emboldened by the crowd's reaction, "my sister here has been job hunting for months. Maybe it's time to consider alternative career paths." He winked at his boss, who was seated across from us, trying to look amused but clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the fact that everyone believed I was still struggling. They had no idea that 2 weeks ago, I had accepted a position that would change everything. I had been sworn to secrecy until the official announcement, but watching my brother parade around like the family success story was testing my patience. "Mason, that's enough." Our mother finally spoke up, though her voice lacked any real conviction. She had always been caught between defending me and avoiding conflict with the men in our family. "What? I'm just saying she needs to get creative." Mason shrugged, taking another sip of his cocktail. "The job market is tough out there. Sometimes you have to work with what you've got." I forced a smile and excused myself to the restroom, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and anticipation. In just a few minutes, everything was about to change, and I couldn't wait to see the look on Mason's face when he realized exactly how wrong he was about my career prospects. Growing up, Mason and I had always been competitive, but somewhere along the way, that healthy rivalry had turned toxic. He was 2 years older and had made sure I never forgot it. While I was studying communications at the University of Texas, Mason was already climbing the corporate ladder, landing his first job at a small advertising agency right out of college. Our parents, particularly our father, had always favored Mason's more traditional path. When I decided to take a brief detour during my junior year, working at a themed restaurant to pay for school, it became family folklore. The job required wearing revealing costumes and performing choreographed dances for the entertainment of customers. It was hardly bikini dancing, but Mason had twisted the story over the years, making it sound far more scandalous than it actually was. "You could have asked us for help," my father would say whenever the topic came up. "Instead, you chose to embarrass the family." What they never acknowledged was that I had been too proud to ask for money, too determined to make my own way. I had worked that job for 6 months, saved enough to finish my degree debt-free, and graduated with honors. But in their eyes, I would always be the daughter who had made questionable choices. After college, I had built a solid career in brand strategy, working for several mid-sized firms and building an impressive portfolio. But earlier this year, my company had been acquired, and my position was eliminated. The severance package was generous, but being unemployed in your mid-30s felt different than the carefree job hunting of your 20s. Mason, meanwhile, had continued his steady climb at Gravora Group. He had started as an account coordinator 8 years ago and had worked his way up to senior marketing director. He made sure everyone knew about his success, especially me. Every family gathering became an opportunity for him to showcase his achievements while subtly undermining mine. "Sabrina's between opportunities right now," he would tell relatives, his tone dripping with false sympathy. It's tough out there for people without clear career trajectories. The irony was that I had always been more creative, more strategic, and more innovative than Mason. His success came from being reliable and playing politics well, but he lacked the vision that separated good marketers from great ones. I had always suspected that given the right opportunity, I could outperform him easily. 2 weeks ago, that opportunity had finally arrived. The call came from Gravora Group's corporate headquarters, inviting me to interview for a newly created position, Vice President of Brand Strategy. The role would oversee all strategic initiatives across the company's major accounts, reporting directly to the president. The interview process had been intense: 3 rounds of meetings, a comprehensive presentation, and a background check that took longer than expected. When I finally received the offer, I had been sworn to secrecy until the official announcement, which was scheduled to happen tonight at Mason's celebration dinner. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. As I stood in the restaurant bathroom, looking at my reflection in the mirror, I thought about how this moment had been building for months. The humiliation I felt wasn't just about tonight. It was the culmination of years of being dismissed, underestimated, and treated like the family disappointment. When Gravora Group had first contacted me, I had been shocked. I knew it was Mason's company, but I had never applied there or expressed interest in working alongside him. The recruiter explained that my reputation in the industry had caught the attention of the corporate leadership team, who were looking to bring in fresh perspective and innovative thinking. "We've been following your work at Morrison & Associates," the recruiter had said during our initial phone call. "Your campaign for the renewable energy client was particularly impressive. We're looking for someone who can think beyond traditional marketing approaches." The position they described was everything I had been working toward: a leadership role with significant autonomy, the opportunity to shape brand strategy for major clients, and a salary that was 30% higher than what I had been making. It was also, notably, a level above Mason's current position. During the interview process, I had met with President David Williams, a sharp man in his early 50s who had built Gravora Group from a small local agency into a regional powerhouse. He had been impressed by my strategic thinking and my ability to see market trends before they fully emerged. "The marketing landscape is changing rapidly," he had told me during our final interview. "We need someone who can anticipate those changes and position our clients ahead of the curve. Your background suggests you're that person." I had carefully avoided mentioning my family connection to the company, and it seemed that Mason's colleagues were either unaware of our relationship or had chosen not to bring it up during the hiring process. It wasn't until my 3rd interview that President Williams had casually mentioned that they had another Ellis on staff. "Any relation to Mason Ellis in our Dallas office?" he had asked with a curious smile. "He's my brother," I had replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. President Williams had nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting. Well, I'm sure he'll be excited to have such talent joining the team." Now, as I prepared to return to the dinner table, I wondered if Mason would indeed be excited. Something told me that his reaction would be far more complicated than simple familial pride. I checked my phone and saw a text from President Williams. "Running a few minutes late, but should be there by 8:30. Looking forward to making the announcement." It was 8:25 p.m. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked back toward the table where my brother was still holding court, completely unaware that his world was about to shift dramatically. When I returned to the table, Mason was in the middle of another story about his latest client success, gesturing dramatically as he described how his strategic thinking had saved a major account. His audience of colleagues listened with the polite attention that company celebrations required, though I could see some of them checking their phones discreetly. "The client was ready to walk," Mason was saying, his voice animated with self-importance. "But I convinced them to give us one more shot. I personally developed a campaign that exceeded their expectations by 200%. I slid back into my seat, and Mason's attention immediately turned to me. "Speaking of campaigns, Sabrina, have you considered updating your LinkedIn profile? I noticed it still says you're seeking new opportunities. That was 3 months ago." The comment stung because it was true. but also because I had been deliberately vague about my job search to avoid exactly this kind of public scrutiny. "I've been selective about the right fit," I replied evenly. "Selective," Mason repeated with a chuckle. "That's one way to put it. Dad, remember when Sabrina was selective about college jobs? She ended up dancing for tips." Our father laughed, raising his wine glass. "Well, she certainly knew how to work a crowd back then. Maybe those skills could transfer to sales." The table erupted in laughter again, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment and rage. This wasn't just casual family teasing. This was deliberate humiliation in front of people who could influence my professional reputation in Dallas. Some of these faces I recognized from industry events, and I knew that stories from tonight would spread beyond this room. "Mason," I said quietly, trying to maintain my composure, "maybe we could save the family stories for actual family time?" "Oh, come on," he waved dismissively. "Everyone here knows that success requires taking risks. Sometimes those risks don't pay off, and sometimes they lead to interesting life experiences." He winked at his colleagues. "Sabrina has certainly had her share of interesting experiences." I was about to respond when I noticed a subtle shift in the room's energy. Several people were looking toward the restaurant entrance, and I could see the host walking in our direction with a distinguished-looking man in a navy suit. My heart began to race as I recognized President Williams making his way through the crowded restaurant. Mason was still talking, oblivious to the approaching figure. "The point is," he continued, "in this industry, you have to be willing to adapt. If traditional career paths aren't working out, maybe it's time to think outside the box. I mean, Sabrina, you've always been creative." "Good evening, everyone," President Williams interrupted, his voice carrying the natural authority that comes with leadership. The entire table fell silent, and Mason's face immediately shifted into his professional mode. "Mr. Williams." Mason stood up quickly, extending his hand. "Thank you so much for joining us. This is such an honor." "The pleasure is mine, Mason. Congratulations on your promotion. You've done excellent work on the Henderson account." President Williams shook Mason's hand, then let his gaze sweep across the table. "I hope you don't mind, but I have a brief announcement to make." "Of course, sir. Please, the floor is yours." Mason gestured grandly, clearly enjoying being the center of attention with the company president present. President Williams smiled and looked directly at me. "Actually, Mason, the announcement concerns your sister." The color drained from Mason's face. Our father's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. The entire table turned to stare at me, confusion written across their faces. "Sabrina," President Williams continued, "I know we agreed to keep this confidential until tonight, but I think now is the perfect time to share the news with everyone." I stood up slowly, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I agree, Mr. Williams." Mason's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "I'm sorry. What news?" President Williams placed his hand on the back of my chair and addressed the entire table. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that Sabrina Ellis has accepted the position of Vice President of Brand Strategy at Gravora Group. She'll be leading our strategic initiatives across all major accounts, effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as Mason's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked like panic. Our father's wine glass finally made it to the table with a sharp clink. "I'm sorry," Mason stammered. "There must be some mistake. Sabrina she doesn't work for—" "There's no mistake," President Williams replied calmly. "We've been courting Sabrina for several weeks. Her reputation in the industry is exceptional, and we're thrilled to have someone of her caliber joining our leadership team." I found my voice, surprised by how steady it sounded. The position involves overseeing brand strategy for clients like Henderson Industries, North Peak Engineering, and Crimson Harbor Group. I'll be working closely with all department heads to ensure our strategic initiatives align with client objectives. Mason's face had gone completely pale. Henderson Industries was his biggest account, the one he had just been bragging about saving. The implications of what I was saying were clearly sinking in. This is... Mason started, then stopped, looking around the table at his colleagues who were now staring at him with a mixture of surprise and something that might have been sympathy. Sabrina brings 15 years of strategic experience and a track record of innovative campaigns that have consistently exceeded client expectations, President Williams continued. Her work at Morrison & Associates, particularly the renewable energy campaign that won 3 industry awards, caught our attention immediately. Our mother, who had been silent throughout the evening, finally spoke up. "Sabrina, why didn't you tell us?" "The announcement was scheduled for tonight," I replied. "I was asked to keep it confidential until it was made official." Mason was still struggling to process what was happening. "But she's been unemployed for months. She's been job searching." "Actually," President Williams interjected, "Sabrina has been fielding offers from several top-tier agencies. We're fortunate she chose to join our team." That wasn't entirely true. There had been other opportunities, but none as significant as this one. However, I appreciated President Williams's diplomatic way of framing the situation. "As Vice President," President Williams continued, "Sabrina will be reporting directly to me and will have oversight responsibilities that span across multiple departments and client portfolios." The weight of those words settled over the table like a heavy blanket. In the corporate hierarchy, I would now be positioned above Mason, who reported to a department director, who reported to a vice president, who reported to President Williams. The chain of command had just been reorganized in a way that no one at this table had seen coming. "I look forward to working with all of you," I said, making eye contact with each of Mason's colleagues. "I'm particularly excited about collaborating with the marketing team on some new strategic initiatives I've been developing." Mason's boss, Director Patricia Hernandez, was the first to recover from the shock. "Congratulations, Sabrina. This is wonderful news. I'm sure Mason is very proud." All eyes turned to Mason, who was clearly struggling to find appropriate words. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to croak out, "Yes, of course. Very proud," but his expression told a different story entirely. The dinner conversation that followed was stilted and awkward. Mason's colleagues made polite conversation with me about my background and plans for the role, while Mason himself seemed to shrink into his chair. Every few minutes, someone would ask him a question, clearly trying to include him in the discussion, but his responses were brief and distracted. "Sabrina," Director Hernandez said, "I'd love to hear about your vision for the Henderson Industries account. That's been one of our flagship clients." I glanced at Mason, who was staring at his plate. "I think there are tremendous opportunities to expand our strategic approach with Henderson. The work that's been done so far has established a solid foundation, but I see potential for more innovative brand positioning that could increase their market share significantly." Mason's head snapped up. "What kind of innovative positioning?" It was the first time he had really engaged since President Williams' announcement, and I could hear the defensiveness in his voice. "Well, from what I've reviewed of their current campaign, it's very traditional, safe. But Henderson is positioned to be a leader in sustainable manufacturing, and I don't think their brand messaging reflects that opportunity. Their current campaign increased sales by 15%, Mason said, his voice tight. "Which is excellent," I replied diplomatically. "But sustainable manufacturing is projected to grow by 40% over the next 3 years. Henderson could capture a much larger share of that market with the right strategic positioning." President Williams nodded approvingly. "Exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach we need. Mason, you'll work closely with Sabrina on transitioning the Henderson account strategy." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Mason would now be reporting to me on his most important client, the account he had just been boasting about saving single-handedly. Our father, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "Well, this is certainly unexpected. Sabrina, you should have told us you were interviewing." "The process moved quickly," I replied, "and I wasn't sure how things would work out until the offer was finalized." "It's quite an accomplishment," our mother added, though her tone suggested she was still processing the information. Mason suddenly stood up from the table. Excuse me, I need to make a phone call. He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. President Williams checked his watch. I should be going as well. Sabrina, why don't you come in Monday morning around 9? We'll get you set up and start introducing you to the team officially. I'll be there, I said, standing to shake his hand. After President Williams left, the remaining group tried to maintain the celebratory atmosphere, but the energy had completely shifted. Mason's colleagues were polite, but clearly eager to wrap up the evening. One by one, they made their excuses and departed, offering congratulations to me and stilted goodbyes to Mason when he finally returned to the table. Soon, it was just our family sitting in the nearly empty restaurant. Mason slumped in his chair, staring at the tablecloth. Our parents exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to navigate the sudden reversal of their children's professional standings. Maybe we should call it a night, our mother suggested gently. Mason looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw something vulnerable in his expression: hurt, confusion, and perhaps a flicker of respect he had never shown before. But then his jaw tightened, and his eyes hardened. Congratulations, Sabrina, he said flatly. I hope you know what you're getting yourself into. I met his gaze steadily. I think I do. The following Monday morning, I walked into the Gravora Group offices wearing my best navy suit and carrying the confidence that comes from knowing you've earned your position. The reception area was bustling with activity, and I could feel curious glances as I made my way to President Williams' office. Sabrina, welcome to your first day. President Williams greeted me with a warm handshake. I've arranged for you to meet with department heads this morning, and we'll do a company-wide introduction at the 11 o'clock meeting. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of introductions, facility tours, and strategic briefings. Everyone I met was professional and welcoming, though I could sense the underlying curiosity about how Mason was handling having his sister join the company in a senior position. At 11 o'clock, the entire staff gathered in the main conference room. President Williams stood at the front and called for attention. I'd like to formally introduce our new Vice President of Brand Strategy, Sabrina Ellis. Many of you have already met her this morning, but I wanted to take a moment to highlight the strategic vision she brings to our team. As he spoke about my qualifications and plans for the role, I scanned the room and found Mason sitting in the back, his expression carefully neutral. When President Williams finished his introduction and asked for questions, the room remained silent for a few moments. Finally, Director Hernandez raised her hand. Sabrina, could you share your initial thoughts on our current client portfolio and any strategic opportunities you've identified? I stood up, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. Thank you, Patricia. After reviewing our client accounts, I see tremendous potential for growth through integrated brand strategies that anticipate market trends rather than simply responding to them. I outlined specific opportunities I had identified for 3 major accounts, including Henderson Industries. As I spoke, I could see heads nodding around the room and noticed several people taking notes. When I finished, President Williams smiled approvingly. Exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need. I'm confident Sabrina will help us not just meet our clients' current needs, but position them for future success. The meeting concluded with scattered applause, and as people filed out, several colleagues approached me with follow-up questions and expressions of enthusiasm for the new direction. Mason was not among them. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the work with an intensity that surprised even me. The strategic initiatives I had proposed were approved by President Williams, and I began implementing changes that would position Gravora Group's clients ahead of emerging market trends. The Henderson Industries account became my first major test. Working with Mason's team, I developed a comprehensive rebranding strategy that positioned them as leaders in sustainable manufacturing. The campaign incorporated cutting-edge digital marketing techniques and strategic partnerships that Mason's more traditional approach had never considered. Mason's participation in these meetings was minimal. He provided the basic account information when asked, but offered little input on strategic direction. His colleagues began working directly with me, bypassing him for decisions that required strategic oversight. 3 weeks into my tenure, President Williams called me into his office. "The Henderson Industries campaign is exceeding expectations already," he said, reviewing the preliminary metrics on his computer screen. "Client engagement is up 35%, and they've received inquiries from potential partners who are specifically interested in their sustainability initiatives. The team has done excellent work implementing the strategy," I replied diplomatically. "Yes, though I have to say, the strategic vision came from you." Henderson's CEO specifically mentioned that this new direction feels innovative and forward-thinking in ways their previous campaigns didn't. That afternoon, I learned that Mason had submitted a request for transfer to the Austin office. Director Hernandez mentioned it casually during our weekly strategy meeting, noting that his departure would require reassigning his remaining accounts. "When is he planning to transfer?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Actually, he's already started the process. He'll be finishing up his current projects over the next 2 weeks, then transitioning full-time to Austin." 2 weeks later, Mason's desk was empty, and Henderson Industries had signed a contract extension that doubled their annual marketing budget with Gravora Group. Mason had left Dallas without saying goodbye. Mason's hasty departure from Dallas didn't go unnoticed in the marketing industry. Word spread quickly that he had transferred to a smaller office after his sister was hired in a position above him, and the professional community drew their own conclusions about his capabilities versus mine. His reputation as a strategic thinker was permanently damaged, and the Austin office, aware of the circumstances surrounding his transfer, gave him smaller accounts and limited responsibilities. Within 6 months, Mason had left Gravora Group entirely, taking a significant pay cut at a smaller agency where he struggled to rebuild his credibility. Our father, who had spent years bragging about Mason's corporate success, found himself making awkward explanations to relatives and neighbors about why his son had suddenly moved to a lesser position. The family dynamic shifted permanently, with our parents finally recognizing that their assumptions about both their children had been completely wrong. 6 months into my role as vice president, I stood in my corner office overlooking downtown Dallas, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed unprecedented growth across all our major accounts. Henderson Industries had become our flagship success story, leading to 3 new major client acquisitions who specifically requested to work with me. The strategic initiatives I had implemented were being studied by other agencies as industry best practices, and I had been invited to speak at the National Marketing Strategy Conference in Chicago. Looking back on that humiliating evening when Mason mocked me in front of his colleagues, I realized that his cruelty had actually been the catalyst I needed to pursue the opportunity that changed everything. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about rising so far above them that their opinions become irrelevant, and their attempts to diminish you only serve to highlight your own brilliance.